ago, 8 or 9 years ago, doesn't make sense anymore. So we don't really need that amount of water out of there, and the ecological damage is not worth the water. So those are the two major points where we have been leading a community-wide effort. We'll get into that in a minute. Community-wide effort to ask SwiftMud not to request the permit. Well, that didn't work, unfortunately. They did request the permits. They went up to DEP, and we've mounted a large campaign to ask DEP not to issue the permit.
And if I can interrupt
sure.
you, last week the Tampa Bay Times editorialized that this shouldn't happen, that the DEP
Yes.
should reject the Morris Bridge sink proposal. And then since that editorial came out, there's been a development from the DEP.
There sure has. We've worked with both of the papers and other media sources, and the consensus pretty much is, don't do it. Yeah, all of you all that are saying don't do it. It's a good idea. However, to our dismay, last Friday, DEP is the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. DEP issued an interim document, which is a notice of intent to issue. And so their thing is, well, we intend to issue this. There are 21 days. If anybody wants to speak up now, sort of like at a wedding. We'll be shouting from the back of the church. We do have very good reasons.
So you're not going to hold your peace.
We're not going to hold our peace. And we'll be making the same points that we've been making for several months now. But the notice of intent is out, and we will be speaking up.
What could happen if, you mentioned the chain link fence, the generators, or the overhead wires? What about if too much water is pumped out of the Morris Bridge sink? What will happen to the beautiful wetlands that you've described in that area that's near where Fletcher crosses the interstate?
Well, that has been found out on a small term level. There have been 2 pumpings out of Morris Bridge sink this century. Well, one was the end of the last century. One was for an extreme drought. They put in a temporary pump and pumped, and what happened there was the local homeowners, there are some homeowners to the north and west of there, they had a number of wells, 18 was the number I heard, number of wells that went dry or went dysfunctional, so SwiftMud had to go in and fix those. Then when the extreme drought was over, then that stopped, and then there was a test pump, again with a portable pump, in 2004, and some of the same things. What we have not known is what happens with sustained pumpings at these high levels, because those 68 acres are a wetland, and a wetland, in order to function as a wetland, needs to be wet. And there are also pine flatwoods, riverine hardwoods. And part of what happens is when you start to decrease, and based on the test pumping, there are some circles. Your readers can't see them here, but if we have ground zero as Morris Bridge sink, there's a whole series of concentric circles, not exactly the same, that show what the expected drop in the aquifer level and the water table is based on how much pumping. And the effects go out way over across the road over into Trout Creek and into the river sometimes. But locally, where the wetlands are, it's unclear how many days a wetland can be dry before it dies. How many days can a pine flatwood or a riverine hardwood, which are up a little bit, how many days does that go dry before those die? And you can't just restore mature trees, you can't just restore wetlands. Those things took centuries, maybe thousands of years to form. And so it's one of those things I don't want to find out.
And so you've set the case where we're potentially going to damage the wetlands near this area and potentially the aquifer, in the depth of the aquifer, I guess it would be, in this area. And you also said earlier that it probably isn't even necessary because for the lower Hillsborough River, it's probably not necessary, right, because you're getting water from Sulphur Springs and from the Tampa Bypass Canal. What about for drinking water? Could that pumping of the sink here at Morris Bridge, could that be the key to having the right amount of drinking water for the region? Or are there other sources like the Bill Young Reservoir and the desal plant that could be used in emergencies?
Well, the answer is it required? Absolutely not. As I mentioned, a lot has changed since 1999 in hydrology. First is the CW Bill Young Regional Reservoir, which is $1.5 billion gallons. That is down in the center of Hillsborough County. It's sort of back where you can't really see it unless you go on Google Earth, but it is huge, and it was built to act as a buffer for the regional potable water supply. When it rains a lot and there's a lot of water, we put it in there. When the rains decrease, as they are a little bit now, then they start drawing down from that. It's a huge shock absorber. Another thing is the Tampa Bay Water Desalination Plant that was built specifically to provide water. And this is the only new water. Every other drop of water we're talking about is not new. It's just a matter of who gets to call it theirs. It's like you have a big glass of water. Well, putting another straw in the water doesn't make the glass any bigger. But if you get your straw, which is a water permit, then you get to take your drink and nobody else can drink your drink. But the desal plant is built. Now, it turned out to be much more expensive than we thought. So Tampa Bay Water prefers not to use that, but that's another shock absorber that's not being used. It turns out the Tampa Bypass Canal has more water than was budgeted, so if it were me, rather than going for the permit up to Morris Bridge, I would say let's just permit some more of that water out of the bypass canal. Because of reduced per capita potable water use, and that's where Tampa Bay Water and others have done a nice job of decreasing water use, both through low flush toilets, watering restrictions, and just a PR campaign. Potable water per capita use has decreased, and that's fabulous. So we don't need as much per capita. And because of that, we've been able to decrease well field pumping in Hillsborough, Pinellas, and Pasco counties. The well fields in, Lord, when they first went in, especially through the 90s, were just huge amounts of water. That's down now at least a third, sometimes more, because we don't need the water as much. We could just increase well field pumping a little bit. In fact, there's a well field right in Morris Bridge, owned by Tampa Bay Water, that pumps right now about 5 million gallons a day. It could easily pump more, but then you get into the old whose straw is in there, because if Tampa Bay Water pumps more, then it's Tampa Bay's water to sell. If it goes into the bypass canal from Morris Bridge Sink, then it's the city of Tampa's water to sell. And so now
you've got economics into it.
Now we've got economics. You either look for the lady or you look for the money, and in this case, I think it's the money.
All right. Well, I have lots more questions
Sure.
for you, but why don't we go to the phone, because we've had some people holding for a long time. Clay in Land O'Lakes, you're on the air. What would you like to say?
In Pasco County here. I'm a board director and the water issues chair, so I'm very familiar with
our
all
mics.
these
Can you
things.
turn down?
And I'd like to
Can you turn our mics down a little bit,
of
please?
a framework. When you talk about minimum flows and levels, for 30 years, the state is more than 30 years behind setting minimum flows and levels, and now that Swift Mud and the other water management districts are doing it, they're doing it on flawed data, and they're doing it based on flows and levels after the damage had already occurred. So
is this something you can respond to?
Paper they're printed on. The other issue is that the Florida Department of Environmental Protection isn't that at all. Actually, people within the department call it the Florida Department, or don't expect protection is what they say it stands for. You know, their whole idea of doing this, they got in this mindset of heating this water. And, well, I want to thank you for all your hard work. I want to thank you and everyone else that works with you trying to put a stop to this. It's an insane idea. It doesn't need to be done. And then I have two questions for you.
Sure.
When the water that's coming from Blue Sink and Sulphur Springs, are they being put into
okay, first question, let me answer that. For Sulphur Springs, it goes up to just immediately downstream of the dam, probably 15 yards, and then runs down a very nice flume that aerates it. So the Sulphur Springs water and then the Blue Sink water, when that comes online, will join that. And so both of those will be released at the base of the dam. And your second question?
Yeah, fair point. That's why I said wasted when it came to drinking water. But go ahead.
They are not currently looking at that. They have done over the past 20 years, the city of Tampa has done a marvelous job of increasing the amount of catchment, that is catching the paper bags and other crud that goes down the stormwater drain. That's not the same as filtrating it, treating it, and reusing it. So the answer to that is no. The city is looking at taking treated wastewater from their Howard Kern sewage treatment plant and trying to find a way to slowly percolate that back into the water systems, maybe up by the bypass canal. But that's a long ways off and a lot of science and a lot of expense. The city, to their credit, has made stormwater better, but they're not capturing that water, and they are trying to find ways to put water back up there. So the city's doing some good stuff.
Clay, thanks so much for your call. Thank you for that. And we do have other callers on the line, but I want to ask a question.
Sure.
I want to go back to Blue Sink.
Right.
Because that is the second one, but it hasn't been constructed yet, or it has?
Blue Sink is under construction, and functionally it looks like it's going to move to the third level.
So it'll be after
Morris Bridge and the bypass canal.
Okay.
Sulphur Springs, yeah.
Okay, great. And so Rob in our newsroom is asking, if we unplugged Blue Sink and restored its natural flow, would that restore the strong flow of Sulphur Springs, and would that be a good thing? Has any elected official suggested that we try to restore the natural plumbing of this part of Tampa? And I think that's because they were originally connected, right? Sulphur Spring and Blue Sink, is that right?
That whole area that comes down out of Lake Magdalene and even further up in Pasco County, that whole area, there's a very sort of shallow valley that runs down through that. And that winds up in all kinds of places. And from the Blue Sink area, it does go down through underground in the aquifer. It does go down to a series of other sinks that are more over on the Sulphur Springs side, and then that winds up in the river. So all of that goes one of two places. It either goes on the surface to the river, or it goes underwater to the river. And one of the differentiations we haven't made yet is groundwater or aquifer water, which is water that's down in the limestone formations below the surface, as opposed to groundwater, which is water on top, which is in lakes and ponds and creeks and rivers. Those are not necessarily the same water, although at some point there is interaction. The water that would be pumped from Blue Sink, and this is where it's an odd misnomer, it's actually going to get pumped. Mostly the source will be Uwanoski Spring, about 100 yards north, and that is aquifer water. Uwanoski Spring is aquifer water. In high rain times, then you get the surface water coming down from Lake Magdalene. Blue Sink, a lot of people have looked at trying to unplug it. It's unclear what's in there, maybe dumpsters, Toyotas, refrigerators, and so far there hasn't been a feasible way to unplug it. But even if you did, you'd just be pulling water from the aquifer, which you're pulling from another sink 100 yards north. So it's almost doesn't matter.
Because everything's connected pretty
Right.
much. So Blue Sink, it's in the center of Tampa essentially.
Yes.
Like it's in a very
Yes.
residential or light
Yes.
industrial area, and the word sink comes from sinkhole.
Right.
If lots of water is pulled out of Blue Sink, let's just say it, that increases the likelihood that there are going to be sinkholes in the area.
Yes. Anytime you mess with the water table in an area, whether it's natural, like the water table has been going up and down with the heavy rains we've had, anytime the water table goes up and down and the pressure changes, you have a risk for a structural change, which when it breaches the surface is called a sinkhole. Sinkholes happen in forest hills naturally, anyway, every 3 to 5 years. When you pump water, and they'll be pumping water mostly when there's a lot of water, but that's still a change to the water table. When you pump water and the first sinkhole opens, whether it is absolutely a coincidence and it was going to open anyway, or it's due to Blue Sink, that will be something for forensic hydrologists and attorneys to figure out, and that could be a real mess.
Yeah. 813-239-9663 if you'd like to join the conversation. My guest is from Friends of the River. His name is Rich Brown. I'm Seán Kinane on WMNF's MidPoint Monday. It's 12:50 in the afternoon. We have about 9 minutes left, or 10 minutes. So if you'd like to call in, 813-239-9663. Randy in Plant City, you're on the air. Sorry about that.
The Army Corps of Engineers was in charge of permitting wetlands.
This is all state stuff, so the Corps of Engineers, I'm not sure where it sort of comes in, where the Corps takes over. I think it's when you get into navigable area, navigable waters. But right now, this recovery strategy, Morris Bridge Sink, is all a state dance. The feds do put out, the whole reason that we got into minimum flows was on the federal level, the Environmental Protection Agency pretty much came to Florida and has, not just for minimum flows, but for the quality of the water and the number of particulates and the chemicals, said, Florida, you got to clean up your act. And the minimum flow is a part of that, but there are other things going on that the federal requires the state to meet good environmental standards, but how the state does it is mostly up to the state.
Randy, thanks so much for that question. Let me read an email question that came in a while back. This person, Sam, is writing, do people not see that development in the state of Florida will eventually have to be curtailed? There's a certain segment of our society that would pave over the Everglades if it weren't for a small group of indigenous Indians. They've also tried to do so in the peripherals of the area. Sam goes on, but he's talking about the issue of development.
I live in a house that is partially built on fill by the river. If somebody hadn't developed that area back in the 20s, I wouldn't be living there. Development in Florida is absolutely a fact of life. Trying to stop it is not worthwhile. What we try to do, us and a whole bunch of other people, is try to do good, environmentally aware development that reduces the footprint of use of environmental resources and maintains as much as possible for public use. So yes, I sometimes drive by, I just came up from I've been talking a while. I just came up from a conference in Fort Lauderdale, and that very odd experience when you drive over Alligator Alley, when you go from townhouse after apartment after townhouse packed in, and then bam, there's a canal and there's the Everglades. And just to look at that dichotomy is just, oh my God, what are we doing? Well, what we're doing is the population of the planet is exploding and we gotta all live someplace. But here, we're trying to work with do it in a way that respects both people and the environment, and it's a constant struggle.